Before we get going, we're just got a couple of housekeeping details. We are presenting, attending, and hosting this workshop from land that was inhabited and managed prior to European colonization. If you have been attending other NOFA Mass workshops, you have seen this slide before. It is offered to remind us that the land that we steward has a political history and a justice context. Descendants of white colonists and white immigrants own most of the land in this country due to racist practices, beginning with broken treaties and extended through sharecropping, redlining, and mortgage lending discrimination practices that are ongoing today. Please take a moment to consider the role that land ownership plays in the economic security, well-being, capacity of self-reliance, and political power of all people, and consider this in context of who owns the land today and why. This interactive map can be found at the following website, native hashtag, well, land.ca.
I just put it in the chat if anybody wants to go check it out.
A very special thank you to the sponsors for the winter conference. Without them, it would have been a lot more challenging to get this thing going. A lot of these people have been sponsors for many, many years, and we want to thank you and acknowledge them. And remember that you do have the ability to check out these in the program. There are some coupons available, and we encourage you to support them, of which one of them is Black Earth, which Andrew represents. So give them a little bit of support if you need some great compost. Ladies and gentlemen, Andrew.
I'd like to get a sense of who's here. All right, cool. We got a bunch of farmers, got a homesteader, home gardener, very new farmer, a farmer/seed company. That's interesting. Professional organic gardener. Okay. So my goal here is to help you understand how to make 100 yards of compost on your farm. 100 yards is it's like a good amount for a farm. And it's like a decent sized pile. And you might, so the pile might be 50 feet long, maybe like 15 feet wide, but you might need a little more room, like 50 feet long and 50 feet wide in order to process it. So composting takes space. So my goal is to, let you go away with how to make 100 yards. This is about like the practice of how to do it rather than like the science and the theory of how to do it. Like we're not going to go over C to N ratios. We're not going to do recipes. In a way, I don't think that's useful because a lot of times you have what you have. And so I'm going to go over field signs for trying to understand what your compost pile is doing, because I find that that's more useful than, trying to get your recipe perfect, because you could start off, you could do all the calculations and get your perfect recipe and measure it out. But once it's in the field, if it rains a lot, or let's say you're flipping it in, like, as you're turning the pile, like you might be losing moisture or gaining moisture. And now you really need to rely on your nose and your eyes and your hands to figure out what to do. Like your recipe is not going to help you at that point. I don't think you need to get stuff analyzed at a lab, your feedstocks. So we're gonna do some basics first, then we're gonna do field signs, and then I'm gonna do some on like how to use equipment. So like tractor or skid steer is probably what you have. And so I got some videos of how to, like of people using it. And we'll just like watch the video and examine it. It's actually Noah is, or maybe it's supposed to be anonymous, but it's a farmer from the North Shore who I'm videoing with his tractor. Okay. And at the end of the whatever, all right, let me rephrase that. The reality is that farmers do not have time to make compost, or so they think. But it's probably true. Like when you're there in the harvest season or the planting season, you really don't have time. And I get that. So I'm gonna try to talk to you about ways to manage that. Or like how to do the bare minimum. I think I want to start off with just talking about this method I have. It's called the bread oven method, and it's actually, I use it for backyard gardeners. And like it's a small pile, 4 feet tall. And when we talk about it, and I'm going to do a whiteboard, like you can just pretend, or we'll call it 10 feet tall because the principles are the same. So I'm going to tell you the bread oven method, and it's going to illuminate the principles, which I think are critical to then making 100 yards. So let me pull up a screen share. Screen share. All right, there it is. And let me get that chat. All right, so, all right. So first of all, so I want to know what kind of carbon supplies you have and what kind of nitrogen supplies. And you guys know this mostly, like, I want to know, so real quick, carbon is basically organic matter. So leaves, wood shavings, sawdust, so straw, compostable paper, other paper products. That's your carbon. You know what? I'm gonna go back to the video. All right, so those are your carbon supplies. All right, and then your nitrogen supplies are like food scraps, dead crabs, vegetable offtakes, roadkill, feces, dog crap, any of that. Those are all your nitrogen supplies. Now, I'm not telling you to use them necessarily, but I'm just saying that that's what they are. And, people think you can't compost meat, cheese, dairy, etc., but you can, and you definitely can. But the reason people think that is because Board of Health has been telling that to homeowners because they don't want homeowners putting that stuff into their backyard pile because that brings rodents in. So all that stuff is compostable. And so like our company, Black Earth Compost, we collect food scraps and we bring it back to the site and we compost it. But we don't compost food scraps. We compost leaves and wood shavings. We compost the carbon. The food scraps are a tool. They have two things: nutrients and moisture. So at Black Earth Compost, we compost leaves, wood shavings, and like other wood products using the nutrients and the water in food scraps. So that's really how you have to think about it, because that's actually what you're doing. Because at the end of the day, the nutrients in the water kind of disappear, and what you're left with is the carbon that's like gotten blackened and it's broken down, but you can still see like pine needles. You can still see pieces of wood, but they're humified and they're brown. So that's what compost is. It's just basically your carbon supply in some like level of degradation. Eventually it'll be nothing. like when you apply compost to your field, it keeps breaking down in the field. You know, only like 5% or so of the nutrients are available right away. The rest are locked in the actual organic matter. So like only like when that first rain comes or the plants are there trying to access it, they only have access to like 5% of those nutrients. The other 95%, those nutrients aren't available to the plants until the microbes like keep eating the organic matter and keep excreting the nutrients. And a key thing to realize is that the microbes actually live in a film of water surrounding the carbon or surrounding the compost. And if that carbon or compost is dry, then they're not going to release nutrients because they're in stasis or they're like hibernating the microbes. So like if you apply compost to the surface and it never gets worked in and like the layer is so thin that the sun just dries it out, like it's not doing anything. And when it rains, you might get like a small amount that flushes down, but it's not a lot because during that time in between the last rain, the microbes didn't eat any organic matter, so they didn't excrete anything. So moisture is critical, and the compost, even when it's in your field, is still composting. And moisture is the most important factor for composting in your pile, your compost pile. So with that said, all right, so some people have written some stuff in. Can you write what your carbon supplies are that you have available? Looks like someone's got leaves and horse manure, leaves and wood chips, cardboard. Okay, we got cow manure. That's a green, obviously. Cardboard, branches, leaves, wood parts. All right, so that's pretty standard. So let's talk about the carbon a bit. So what you want to do is get a good mix of your carbon. Obviously sawdust is carbon, but you don't want your compost pile. And so now that we're talking, let's think your compost pile is like, let's say 8 feet tall and 20 feet wide. So whenever we're talking, like put that in your head. Okay, like a cone shape, 8 feet tall, 10 feet high. That's probably like, 30 yards, 25 yards, cubic yards. Okay, so sawdust is a carbon supply. It's made of wood, but you wouldn't want that entire pile to be sawdust because you're not gonna have airflow through there. Like they used to pack blocks of ice in sawdust to keep it through the summer because there'd be no airflow. So the cold air couldn't escape and warm air couldn't get in. So texture is really important, the texture of your carbon. Like what you want is like a wood chip and then like a leaf and then like another wood chip and maybe sawdust is sprinkled through. You can have too much texture. Like if your compost pile is all straw, then there can actually be too much airflow and the pile can't hold on to its heat. So likewise, you don't want your carbon to be all paper because the paper will layer and like leaves can layer too. And when layered like that, you're not gonna have airflow. So, but paper with leaves and wood chips, will start to like make some spaces and allow for flow. Okay, now what green stuff do people have? What nutrient supply? I saw cow manure. I see grass clippings. So grass clippings can actually So grass clippings, when it's green and moist, that's a nutrient supply. But if you leave those grass clippings out in the sun and they dry out and the nutrients actually bleach out, and that actually becomes a brown. So that's a good example of how, of like, what is your greens? Your greens are things that are moist and have nutrients. Okay, so someone wrote in kitchen waste, seaweed. Okay, so only one person has a nutrient supply. All right, there's someone else. Plant waste, greens, vegetable scraps. Okay. Someone wrote wood ash. So a word on that. Wood ash is super high pH, and you can actually inhibit your compost pile by putting too much wood ash in, because it's such high pH that it'll prevent the microbes from living. So I would not, like, you really just want to, like, if you have wood ash, add it to your carbon stockpile, like sprinkle it through there, maybe like a 5-gallon bucket for, like, I don't know, 20 yards or something, like a real small amount. I almost wonder if wood ash is better, like direct applied, but that's a question for someone else who knows more about that. Okay, so horse manure. So if it's bedded, it can be a carbon, and if it's not, then, like, if it's just the turds, then it's probably a nitrogen supply. All right, cool. So that's what we're working with. Pretty straightforward. Let's go to the whiteboard. All right, so I'm going to go over what I call the bread oven method. And this method, you can use it as like your on-farm organic waste disposal unit. You know, so it is, no, you gotta do bigger than that. All right, so let's say it is tall like this. So it's probably, say, 8 feet tall, and maybe 20 feet at the base. Sorry, there we go, 20 feet base. All right, so what you do, and so if this is your compost pile, then somewhere else you have your carbon supply. Like, you cannot have enough carbon. Like, don't let any leave your property. You want as much of it as you can. And if you need more, there's a certain time of the year where people put it in bags and put it on the street. So that's an option. But leaves are great. You can talk to your like local landscapers, see if they can get leaves. You only have a couple months to get them, but leaves are great. The other great thing is horse manure. You know, there have been some issues with herbicides in them. We haven't seen it in a while. But you could make some compost with that horse manure, then plant some stuff in it, like clover, and see if you have any herbicide effects. And if you don't, then that supplier is probably good. And, you know, it's probably a horse stable down the road from you. So anyways, here's your compost pile. Now, what you're going to do, and whether you do this with a tractor or you do it with a pitchfork, what you're going to do is you make your pile, make it maybe like 10 feet tall, and they'll shrink down to 8 feet after a day. You're going to dig a hole into the side, and this is going to be your tunnel, and I'm going to call it the door. So you dig a door in, just enough to get your stuff in. Like, if you have a tractor bucket full of vegetables, then you dig your door a tractor bucket wide. And what you do is you then dump your greens, your food scraps or whatever in the middle. Okay, and then you then pull away, you close that door back up, and you walk away, and you don't return for 1 week. All right, and then you come back the next week, and you dig in again, and you dump your stuff inside. Okay, and then you come back, then you close the door up, and you leave, and you come back a week later, and you do the same thing. You put your stuff inside, and what's going to happen is this center is going to start becoming black, and the food scraps are going to start disappearing. And every time you open it up, like as the weeks go on, you're going to see the moisture coming out, and you're going to see steam coming out and heat coming out. And so what you're doing is you're making an environment for the composting to happen. So this is your core. And so let me tell you what doesn't work real quick. So what doesn't work is the layer method, where people put their stuff on top. Now, you're definitely supposed to put carbon on top of that, but a lot of times people don't. So what happens is when you put your green stuff on top, whether it's greens or food scraps or whatever, what you're doing is you're exposing it to the sun and the atmosphere. And what happens is these dry out. And then the next time you come with, so these are all dried out. And then let's say a week later, you put some carbon on top, and then you put some more food on top. What's happening is you're burying dry. You're burying stuff that's dry and it's lost its nutrients. And so that defeats the purpose. What you're doing here is you're putting the nutrients, the greens inside, and the moisture and the nutrients are they're like encapsulated in here. So they're able to be used. That's the key. And like, it's pretty straightforward, but the key is don't leave your greens out to be, to like lose their moisture, because then they become browns basically. And so what's going to happen is this pile is going to start shrinking because the carbon all around here is going to start incorporating. And so then what you do is you take your carbon from over here and you start putting it into the pile. You start moving stuff over, like putting it on top. So you always want to put it on top. And what will happen is this center part is going to get really dark and moist. And so you could keep doing this indefinitely. And that would be a way to dispose of your food scraps. But let's say that you actually want to make compost and like actually use it later. So this is where we separate from like the backyard person, and we start talking about how to make like 100 yards. So what you'll do there is you'll start making like another core. So let's say you built this for a month. Now what you do is you're going to start adding your food scraps. You'll add more carbon over here. You'll make a new pile on the side, and then you'll start putting your food scraps in here. Whoops, it's hard to grab these things. And then, so now you have your core over here, and now you have your core is going to start to develop over here. And So what will happen is you're developing this whole line of this long pile that's had nutrients incorporated into it. And like what you're doing is you're properly managing your green supply. And that's really what you have to do on the the daily, the weekly basis. That's like the bare minimum, because you're busy. Like a lot of people, I see a lot of farmers that take their vegetable scraps and they dump them on the side of the pile, like right over here. So what I'm saying is dump them on there, or like be able to dig in a little bit and then dump them in, and then cover it. Cover it up. Like don't leave your green stuff out. All right. So what's gonna happen whenever you add stuff to this pile, the temperature drops. So the reason you want to leave it for a week or not disturb it is because every time you disturb it, the temperature drops, and then you're down wherever ambient is. And slowly the temperature comes up, and it slowly comes up, and eventually, so when you break open that pile again, the temperature is going to drop, and then it's going to start to come up again as you leave it there. So that is why you don't want to disturb it every day, because if you disturb it every day, it's not going to have the time to come up. And most of the composting happens in this, time when the temperature is higher. So like day 4, 5, and 6. So if you're always disturbing it and the temperature can't get up, then it's not going to compost as fast. Okay, so that's the basic method. And why else does this work? Because inside here, so the temperature is rising, and that rises because the microbes, they're eating the food and breathing oxygen. They're doing exactly what we're doing. And when we eat food, it generates energy. And obviously there's loss from any, energetic system. So that's where the heat comes from. The loss is the heat. So the microbes are eating and they're generating heat. And this large pile over top is what is keeping that heat in. It's an insulating blanket. So it could be 140 degrees inside here, but over here, it's ambient. Now, yeah. So what you do is, let's talk about animals real quick. So you want to be able to walk around and see if you've had any animal strikes. Like the way you keep animals away is by not letting them know what's going on. Once they know what's going on, they're going to keep coming back. So that's why you want to have it buried. You have the food scraps buried, and if you're doing just one pile and you're always using that door, you always use the same door, because if you leave the rest, like the pile left undisturbed, is going to filter odors as they come up and out, and so the only place that odors can come out is through that door. So you want to protect that door. Cover it with a lot of carbon, and the animals won't know what's going on. That's key. You don't want animals in there because animals that burrow can disturb that core and release the heat. So that's your whole strategy with animals. You really don't want them. Definitely don't want birds, especially seagulls, because they just keep coming back. I don't like the pallet method because it prevents you from being able to see like if animals have come in. It's made too many hiding spaces, but we're not doing that there because we're making 100 yards. All right. Let me open a presentation.
Hey, Andrew,
Yeah, go ahead.
I got a couple of questions in the chat for you, if you want to field those for a moment. One is
Okay.
about anaerobic. Are you not worried about creating an anaerobic environment?
Of course. So that's where field signs come in. Like every time you open up and get at that core, you want to see, does it smell bad? Is it too moist? Like if you're dumping bucket loads of vegetables in there, it's going to add a lot of moisture. And each week when you do that, it's going to keep adding moisture. So that's when you should start advancing the pile outwards. You should really so just doing one, like one 8-foot tall pile and just adding maybe like, you know, the food from your lunches or small amounts, like that 8-foot pile can handle that. You can keep adding to that. And if it starts to smell in there, you can actually add some carbon right into that center. So, but if you're making bucket loads, you really want to be advancing that pile out as you go. So the purpose of that bread oven of the small pile is really to illuminate some of the concepts of like basically putting the stuff in the middle and not letting your nutrients dry out. So all right, let's talk about the annual cycle real quick. So the annual cycle of composting. Your carbon supply, if it's leaves, it mostly comes in the fall. So that's when you want to accumulate all the carbon you can. You have your stockpile. Now your greens, if they're food scraps, they come in every week. If they're vegetable offtakes, they mostly come in the fall. So if they're coming in each week, you need to manage it each week. You get them buried, you cover it up, and you build that out. If they're coming in a large burst in the fall, then you want to have a pile large enough to accept that. If that's what you're doing and you're mostly taking your summer and fall stuff, then you'll incorporate that into your carbon pile and you'll probably work it mostly in the fall and in the winter. And then it could be ready for spring. And you accumulate your carbon in the fall again for next year's. And that you'll have that ready for next year when you're getting the you know, your summer greens and fall greens. So in that case, you need two piles. You need one that you're finishing for the spring, and you need another one that you're starting in, you know, with your carbon that just came in the fall. And I like to finish it through the fall and in the winter and then get it covered up. So then you're not like so when you're overwintering it in the fall and in the spring, it's not getting oversaturated by the rains in the spring. And then you can peel it back, like peel that tarp back and finish it, and like then screen it or just spread it direct, you know, in the spring or the summer. Let's go to.
I got a quick question for you, Andrew, too.
Yeah, go ahead.
Somebody's got it here. I think what they're getting at, they say, what is the 8-foot pile made of? And I think what they're referring to is the original when you start that 8-foot pile.
Yep.
What's your material there?
Yep. So that's made of all carbon. So you're starting with all carbon.
Yep.
And then you're adding your either your weekly food scraps, or you're adding like what you get off in the fall, for example.
Yep. And a couple questions on goat manure. Probably relating, would you consider the goat manure a carbon or a nitrogen source?
Basically, if it's bedded. If it's just the turds, then it's nitrogen. If it's got mostly bedding in it, then it's a carbon supply. So let me share my screen for this. So where is it? Here we go. All right, so we'll do some visuals here, so then you can all right, can everyone see my screen, Compost Basics?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, so the first thing is like, where are you going to put your pile? You don't want it in a wet spot. You do want it to be close to your carbon stockpile, so you want to have good access for vehicles. Like if you're taking leaves or wood chips from someone, then they need to be able to get their trucks there in the fall. So I know, good space is at a premium, but you don't want to put your compost pile in a backfield where it's wet and the ground, when it's saturated, you can't work it, because a lot of times you're going to have to work it in the fall and the winter because you're busy the rest of the year. Up on hills is good. And you also want to think about prevailing wind, and you don't want to put it right next to a neighbor. So think about those. So this would be, can you guys see my mouse here? So here's the carbon stockpile, and these are some food scraps that came in. So we made a bed of carbon and we dumped them here, and it's right next to this pile. So what we're going to do is take the carbon from here, dump it on here, and then roll it over and fold it into this pile. So this is adding it as a batch. And like you'll fold it in and you'll have a new pile that's on the side of this one. And that's how you, like, as stuff comes in each week, you keep building this pile out. So this is way more than you'll get. Like you'll have a smaller amount, if you just have a bucket full of vegetables, but the concept's the same. You want to dump them on this pad of carbon, blend it there, and then fold it up. So you can see here, like this is some problems you would have with like working after it's raining. You don't want to make ruts. You don't want to ruin your ground. Okay. So your carbon source, we talked about this a bit. nitrogen source, we've already talked about this. So there's food scraps again. There's trash in them. Like if you're getting from restaurants, you know, you want to be careful of that. So here's examples of restaurant trash. Dealing with food scraps from a commercial hauler can be challenging. If you can control the supply, it's much better. Green crabs. We took a whole bunch of green crabs one year, and they're a great supply. So just problem is you have to kill them first. So we made a hot tub, like a basin, dumped them in, and then dumped you know, carbon on top in order to basically suffocate them. I don't know if you know what green crabs are, but they're an invasive that the state's trying to get rid of. So green crabs are a good supply, and there's the dead green crabs. So at this point, we had mixed them up as you would any other nitrogen supply that can't walk around. All right, so we talked about this, accumulating the carbon in the fall and the spring. You add nitrogen in through the spring, summer, and fall. And then you work your pile during that whole time, and then you cure it through the winter. And then you put your cover on to keep it from getting oversaturated, and then you spread your stuff in the spring. Okay, so now the other one I want to show is, okay, can you guys see where it says smell? Do you guys see the ammonia molecule?
No, I just see it says carbon source.
Okay. All right, let me share the other one. That's what I need to do. Okay.
There we go. That looks good.
All right. So this is compost field signs. So you want to use your eyes, your nose, and your hands to figure out what's going on. Because every time you go into that pile or every time you turn a pile, you want to get a sense of what's going on in there. So ammonia, you probably know what it smells like, but it's a nitrogen with 3 hydrogens, and it can volatilize into the air. So this pile right here, you can see there's the carbon's pretty broken down, and there's nitrogen in there. And this plume coming off is moisture. And you're gonna wanna smell that and see what's going on. If you smell a lot of ammonia in there and it's strong, then that means that you have plenty of nitrogen and possibly even too much. So you would want to either add carbon to that or just change your mix for the future. Sometimes you don't want to add carbon as you're midstream, you know, mid composting, because it basically brings the whole pile like back to its starting point, and you're actually trying to finish material. Like if you have a compost pile in November that you want to finish, you wouldn't add fresh carbon to that. Like you wouldn't add wood chips to that because it's not going to be done, and you're going to be spreading wood chips in the spring. Another smell would be, they're called volatile fatty acids, but basically things that smell putrid. If that's the case, then you're not getting enough oxygen. So it's either you're not turning enough, or you're maybe it's too wet inside. So at that point, you either want to turn more, or maybe you do want to add some carbon in there to soak up the moisture. Another smell is like a kind of like bread smell. like that is generally good. And that means you're doing all right. If it, sometimes it can smell mostly like your carbon feedstock, and that might mean you need more nitrogen. If you don't smell any ammonia, it might mean you need to add some nitrogen. So, okay, so using your eyes for this is important. So basically, we're breaking down the carbon feedstock, and you can finish compost whenever you want. So the way it works is you're adding, you have your carbon, you add your nitrogen feedstock, you work the pile a bit, turning it, and at some point, and so during that time, the temperature's up near 120, 130, 140, and you're measuring with a thermometer. So at some point, you're going to turn it and the pile's not going to heat up. And that's because the nutrients, and so if it's still moist and it's not heating up, it means that it's starting to stabilize. So you're entering the curing phase. And at that point, you want to look at the compost and see, are you happy with the state of the carbon? Like if you're looking at it and you still see a bunch of leaves, or the wood chips are like bright wood color, you might say, you know, I don't think this is ready and I want to break it down more. So to break it down more, I mean, you can let it sit for a year and it will slowly break down, or you could add some more nitrogen to it and break it down that way. So adding nitrogen to a compost pile is, and when I say nitrogen, I mean any of your greens, it's kind of like adding a bomb, and it allows the microbes to start eating that carbon because they have the nutrients to do so, and they're going to take off and they're going to be needy. They need oxygen. And you want to manage it, like once you add those nutrients, you want to manage the pile and turn it, you know, each week or turn it more from that point when you added it until it stops heating up. You want to take that airplane in for like a nice smooth landing. And then once it stops heating up, then you can look at your carbon again, or you can look at the compost and say, am I happy with this? And then at that point, you can enter the curing stage. So this one in the upper left, that's very active right now. It's clearly hot, and you can also see food scraps. So this one's not ready for curing, and this needs a lot of attention and activity. This one over here on the right, you can see a lot of so it looks like wood shavings. I think this is stable manure with the green crabs, and you can still see the crabs and you can still see the stable manure is like brown. So not only is the carbon not broken down, or else it'd look black, but there's still a nitrogen source that that is like about to like explode. And now on the bottom, this stuff is finished. There's no nitrogen left, and the carbon is not visible. Like you can't tell what it is, and it's kind of a black color. So you'd be happy with this, and you say, all right, I'm not going to add any more nitrogens. I'm going to let this finish. Okay. So your compost pile is going to look dry no matter what. When you look at your pile, what you're actually looking at is what it looked like last time you turned it. Like the compost, like the inside is going to look different. It's going to be more broken down. And so this pile might look dry, but on the inside, if you dig in, it's moist. Now, if you dug in and it was all dry, then you might be lacking moisture. And that is a big problem because moisture is your most important factor, either having too much or too little. And if you don't have any moisture, then it's not going to break down. So this is, again, it's a field sign. You can't just look at a compost pile and know if it's moist or dry. Another way I can tell it's moist is you can see up here and over here and over here, you can see these moist spots. And what that is that's actually where moisture is coming from the inside of the pile and it's coming out. And so the pile is hot inside and air's coming in the sides and going up. And that air is actually bringing the moisture with it. And so this is the exhaust port in a way. And it's moist because, you know, the sun's on it, but it's moist because moisture is coming up. So just by looking at this, you can tell that this pile is active. Again, same thing. And you can see here, you can still see the carbon, you can still see the wood shavings, and they're that brown color. Okay, so organic matter, it changes color when you add moisture. So it's brown when it's dry, and it's black when it's moist. And so just because a pile is brown doesn't mean that it's not finished. Now, if it's brown like this, and it looks like wood that looks like it just came off a tree, then that's not broken down. But this stuff is brown, but it's a deeper brown. And when you get this moist, it'll turn black. Whereas when you get this moist, it's kind of like a different shade of brown. All right. So another field sign is just looking at the pile after you turn it. So these piles, these piles they were turned like a week ago, and the moisture is coming off the top. And so that means that they're very active. Like I said, the air's coming the side and going up the top. And here's the same exact piles the next day. And what's the difference is that the humidity out, it's a high humidity day. Like it might have just rained. So that's why you can see the plume. So in this situation, they're pumping the same amount, but you just can't see it because the humidity is so low in the atmosphere, because the weather. So just because your pile looks like this doesn't mean it's not active.
Excuse me, were you keeping those covered with the tarps there that I saw in the picture?
We were at one point. So okay. There's a couple different covers you can use. There's these compost blankets, which are, I like to use them for curing, or I like to use tarps for curing. I've gone to no tarps now, but tarps can help you because, like, if you're in the summer and you're trying to keep moisture in, you can put a tarp as kind of like a yarmulke on the top, and all this moisture will kind of condense on the tarp and then drip back and stay on the pile. but it's still, the air can still get in the sides. So that can be a strategy for keeping moisture. Like, let's say you don't have any more greens. But I've personally moved away from tarps, but they're great when you're curing. Like if your compost is done and you don't want it to get totally saturated over the winter, then like I definitely recommend that. So there's the emotional state of a pile. You can kind of tell how it's doing just by looking at it. So this pile is happy. It's mottled. Like you can see the mottled color. It's got some dark spots and some light spots. And that's, you know, dark spots are moisture. It's got a pointy ridge line. Now, this pile is kind of sad. It's low and it's kind of U-shaped. And this pile is ready to be turned. So see these piles, they're kind of low and sad. And what's happening is they're compressing over time. They are like after you turn a pile, the moisture, I'm sorry, after you turn a pile, they're nice and tall and pointy and happy. And the air is able to like go through them because there's air spaces. But what happens after like 2 weeks or so is they compress and the weight of them pushes them down and that closes air spaces. And then they're not gonna be pumping air as much. And at that point, then they're gonna start to go anaerobic inside. So these piles are sad and they might need to be turned soon. And that's kind of hard to see, but these are happier. They're taller. You can see the shape. Here's another thing you might see is so this is a pile where we've taken a scoop, we've backed up the machine and we've driven it forward and dumped it here. And you can really see the airflow in the pile. So air comes in these sides and goes up through. This is like a profile of the inside of a pile. So air's coming in, it's picking up moisture, it's going here and the moisture is going up. And what it does is it makes these like dry triangles. And so you want to manage moisture. So when you're using your machine, you're scooping this moist stuff and you're putting it in the middle over here. And then you can scoop this dry stuff and put it on top. So at the end, after you're done moving the pile, you've actually, it looks dry. And it's because you've encased the moisture. You want your pile to look like dry and kind of crappy after, like right after you turn it. At the end of the day, you're looking at it, it should look dry. And that's because you've put all the moist stuff in the middle. If you put that dry stuff in the middle and then you put your moist stuff on top of it, all that moisture you're gonna lose to the sun. And your pile, next time you go to open that, it's gonna be totally dry. So this can be a strategy for managing your moisture. Okay, temperature. So a 3-foot thermometer is great. And you want to put it right in the side of the pile, like right along this area. You can also put it straight down and that'll tell you, but you're basically trying to get at this area to get the moisture. Because if you put your thermometer in over here, you're just gonna read this like, it's not hot here, in part because the ambient air is coming in. So you're trying to get at the core. So temperature. So again, you can see these. So we just got some snow, and you can see these pockets here. That's where hot air is exhausting out. So cool air is coming in all the other places, and hot air is coming out here. So that's a way you can tell that your pile's doing good. Remember, these are field signs for how to determine if your pile's doing all right. So you know it's composting. Here's another, you can see all along these ridges. And over here, you can see that air is exhausting out of here. And you can see how we're using blankets here for like the later stage stuff and for the curing. And again, you can also, like the blankets allow moisture to leave, whereas like a tarp's not going to do that. Yeah, and these blankets are hard to move when they're this big and frozen. Taste. So there is no taste. That's a joke. All right. Now the last one I want to show you is how to use your equipment to move a compost pile. And there's a couple different ways. So stop the share here.
I've got a quick question about the the heat of the pile during winter, like this time of year when it's cold.
Yep.
Is it basically safe to leave the pile as long as you want if it's still an active compost pile and not worry about it getting too hot with the lower ambient temperature?
Good question. So I'd like to use that analogy of like adding nutrients or like setting off a bomb. Mm-hmm. When you add your nitrogen, you want to manage that, you know, more actively over the next couple weeks. You want to turn it, you know, every week or every other week if that's all the time you have. But once you add your nutrients, you don't just want to let it sit, because what will happen is they'll probably leach out the bottom. When you turn your pile, you're redistributing the moisture, and it's mixing with the carbon instead of like flowing straight down. Because remember, you're putting your green in the center of the pile, and you know it'll start to break down and start releasing moisture, and that moisture will go straight down. So half the reason for turning is not only to make your pile happy by giving it fluff so air can flow, but it's also to redistribute the moisture. But you know, turning in the winter sucks. So because, I mean, it's great if the ground's frozen, but if it's not, then you're going to be, you know, making ruts. So that's why I think it's good if you're doing a batch with your like vegetable offtakes from the fall, manage it during, you know, October, November, and then get it settled and then let it cure through the winter. Like don't add new stuff to that. Can you guys see this, how to use the equipment? Okay. All right, so there's two methods. One is the pick up and dump method. So this is the pile on the right that we're taking from, and this over here is the pile that we're making. So we're coming in from the back, we're scooping, we're backing up, and we're dumping here. That's the method I prefer. Actually, it looks like we're going the other way, but basically coming up and you're dumping on the front. And then you're going back, you're taking your next scoop and you're laying it down. I like that method because it gives you more control over the moisture, and it means that the whole pile gets turned and you're sure of that. Like what I was saying before, like this allows you to dump those moist scoops right in the middle and dump the dry scoops on top. So I prefer this method. The other method is the pushover. So you can see here's a tractor, and you can see behind the tractor is the pile. So this is all one long windrow. probably 100 yards. So we've already added our nutrients to it, and now we're just trying to work in it. So back here is the pile that we haven't moved yet, and this is the one we're moving. And so we're basically coming in from the side, scooping up and rolling it over. And you can see how you're not going to turn the whole pile because it's a lot of work to keep rolling it over so that you're actually rolling the whole thing over. But this is a way to do it. So you need ample space over on this left side, and you need ample space over this right side. So one way to do it is to, over the season, you just roll it from left to right, and then it's finished over here on the right, or actually that's the left. The other way is you can move it back and forth like this. So that is really up to how much space you have. But both are an option. So that's my video, but here's the, so come in, you did your first roll. So see, you exposed a bunch of moisture. Up and over. And then now you back up and you come in again and you do the same thing. See how his bucket's coming in high? So he's not taking the full amount. He's just doing the top part first, then he'll come in and do the bottom part. So right here, he had to drive on the pile to get it rolled over. And that's fine as long as you then come in and then fluff that amount. Like you don't want to drive on material and then not fluff it. See, so now he's coming in and he's getting that. And doing the same thing. So one downside to this method is that you can see how moist this material is that's on the surface. And we're leaving that exposed to the air. So this is a great way to dry your pile out. And you can see the moisture coming off. Every time you turn it, you're gonna lose moisture as the heat escapes, but you're also, you also lose this moisture that's on the surface. So that's a downside to this method. And one way around it, so turning a pile, if you turn the pile in the sun, you will dry your pile out. So that's good if you are trying to dry it out. Like if it's too moist, you know, you do some field signs, you smell it and it smells anaerobic. And then you see that there's too much moisture. You might want to turn it in the sun and like while the sun's out, and that will dry it out. To add moisture, you turn it either after a rain or even during a rain. And obviously that's challenging if your working surface isn't great. So that might not be possible. And so that's why sometimes you have to manage moisture in other ways. Like the moisture of the pile is your most important asset in the composting, because it is hard to add moisture. Like adding with a hose, there's just you need too much water. So you should use moisture saving techniques, and this isn't necessarily one of them. But it is possible that you could, so it's possible that you could actually, let's say, so it's moist over here, right? So, and you know that there's a dry triangle in here, like this bottom part's probably dry. What you can do is take this scoop from like farther up the pile and then dump it on top of here, kind of as a cap. So that's one method where you can actually protect your moisture and keep it in. And then at the end, it's nice to clean up afterwards. Come down, scoop it, and you get a nice, it kind of cleans up all this junk that's on the side that you couldn't get. So some general tips. We already talked about not leaving any moisture on top. You turn a pile to manage the moisture from the greens, and you turn your pile to fluff it or make it happy. Your site layout, you want to keep your carbon close to where you're receiving your nutrients. And if you're turning your pile, you want to make short moves so you don't have to drive far. If you don't have any traction, like don't bother trying to turn your pile. And don't turn the pile when the wind's blowing at your neighbors. And here's a good example of what, so the farmer here tried to add moisture by turning after it was raining, and you just end up with this, and that it sucks. So it's sometimes better to work on use moisture conserving strategies as you go. Here's an example like poor mixing, where the carbon isn't getting mixed in. Yeah. So blankets, we talked about this a little bit. So this can help protect moisture, but I'm not really a fan of it anymore. And sometimes you can get these mushrooms in here. So this is the only type of mushroom I've seen, and that can be a good sign that your pile has moisture and the carbon. So, all right, I think we are probably running out of time a little bit.
We're getting close. We're getting
Okay.
close. I got a couple of quick questions for you, Andrew, from the
Yep.
chat. One of them is about 3-foot or 4-foot compost thermometers.
Yep.
I'm sure the standard answer for that is Amazon, but do you have any other recommendations
I like
where
Rio
people might be able
Temp.
to get those?
Yeah, Rio Temp is a good brand.
And is there anybody in Massachusetts that's actually selling them, or is that something you'd be getting on Amazon?
I think, yeah, you might be able to get them from a garden center, like a 2-foot one, but you're not gonna be able to buy a 3-foot one. Again, I think Rio Temp is a good company.
Yeah. If you are getting a bunch of material from restaurants and you ended up with a lot of trash, how's your technique for getting out, plastic and trash and basic garbage?
Yeah.
Well, I guess not garbage, but trash.
We have, so best way is just pull it out at the beginning before you even mix it in, before you mix those food scraps in. Best is just to pull it out. And then for, most farmers aren't going to have a screener most likely. So, but that's how you do it at that point. But I'd say just don't let the trash come in the first place, or go through it and pull it out first.
Got somebody else asking why you're no longer a fan of blankets and tarps.
I'm a fan of them for curing, but they're heavy, they're a pain, they get ripped. That's why we don't use them. But you should definitely experiment with them, especially using a tarp as a yarmulke through the summer. And when I say yarmulke, it's just because it doesn't go all the way down the sides. That can really help keep moisture in. Yeah. Yeah. So I feel like I didn't do you guys service on how to make 100 yards. It's definitely challenging doing it like this. Usually I do it with a whiteboard.
Andrew, you did great.
I think you want to yeah. If you want to think of it like, the first thing to do is think about where your carbon is and where your nutrients are, and when do you get your nutrients. If you get them on the weekly scale and you're just trying to manage like a small amount that's coming in each week, you can have just a small like bread oven type pile that's 20 feet wide and 8 feet tall, and you can just put the stuff in the middle each week and then cover it back up. And that can just be a bioreactor on your farm that can go really indefinitely. Or if you're getting your nutrients in as a batch, like it comes in all through the summer, or it comes in, if it comes in during the growing season, then your compost should be treated as a batch, where you're making your first you're incorporating your nutrients, then you're managing that bomb over like a couple months, and then you set it down to cure. And so those are two different methods. Like as a batch style, yeah, you are actually turning the pile. As a bioreactor style, you could just leave it like that and just keep adding to that middle and keep adding carbon on top.
Real quick, do you have anything on making a screener for, say, processing that batch of compost once a year? Like what size screen do you like to use? How big do you like to build it?
Yep. So we tried to build our own screener like 3 times, and it was hard. We had a snowblower motor like shaking a screener deck, and ask Noah about that. So I mean, what size? I'd say 3/4. No, I'd say like an inch. It all depends what stuff you're trying to remove. I think it'd be a challenge for a farmer to do anything lower than like 3/4 of an inch. And it depends like, is it shaking? Are you dumping it on and raking it with a rake? Do you even need to screen it?
Well, okay, so Andrew, I'll throw this one at you. I'm going to take this because there's a lot of talk in the compost, especially if we're talking about the fungal component, which is, hard to establish in a compost pile that you're manipulating and turning to make the compost. I personally think like screening isn't necessary, because now you just achieved, hopefully, a highly fungal compost pile, and then you're going to shake it all up some more. Now, yes, I think the market wants to see like a very clean, crisp, unified. If somebody's making seedlings and using the small little celled flats, yeah, they're going to want something screened. But essentially, maybe we don't want to disturb this too much, or as little as possible.
I don't think that matters, because once you scoop into a pile and you dump it, it's going to break things up just as much as a screener will. So I don't think that matters.
And you certainly have to pay attention to your market at the end of the day.
Well, it's different. I mean, if you're trying to sell the compost, that's a whole different story. We screen to a 1/2 inch because no one wants to see a chicken bone. But yeah, if you're selling it, different story. But if you're using it on your fields, that's your own preference, and it depends what you put in it. All right. Someone asked about, is lime okay? That's the same exact thing about wood ash. So use it very sparingly. So many old timers, they tell me, oh yeah, we just dump lime on it and then cover it up. So I don't think that's the way to go. I think that's a way to make like a body disappear without much odor, you know, and I don't know if I don't think it's going to achieve what you want. Someone asked me about site selection. So, good access for the vehicle. Like you guys saw the ruts that were made, like a good well-draining site on a slope. On a slope is great, because you want the water to, like when it rains, you want water to run off. You don't want to, if you're doing a long windrow, you don't want to put the windrow like that on the slope. You want to put it like that so that water runs around it. Yeah, and I don't think sun or shade matters. Not that you would have enough shade to shade a 100-yard pile, but yeah, I think access is good. And like if you're if you have a challenge, like if you don't have the time for composting, then put it close so you don't have to like drive out to the back to manage it. You know, maybe maybe just a small bioreactor right near your like right near your kitchen area, you know, so you can just manage stuff at the end of your meal. So how small can a bread oven be? 4 feet is like 4 feet tall, 4 feet wide. You know, I can have a bread oven in my backyard at 120 degrees through the winter. No problem. If I'm so another question, if you're storing finished compost, do you tarp it? You don't have to, but if it's moist and you're letting it sit over the winter and the spring, then yeah, I like to keep the rain off it if it's done. Let's see.
And guys, feel free to chime in if you have a question. Don't necessarily need to type it in the chat.
Yeah, so for our compost, yeah, it's just food scraps and carbon. And actually, I didn't get into like a really important part of like why food scraps are so great. So your compost is only as nutritious as what you put in it. If all you put in it is grass, and like let's say that grass came from a field where you're only applying NPK to it, then your compost that you make out of that grass is probably going to be really deficient in a lot of nutrients, because the compost is only as good as what you put in it. And food scraps are great because it draws from so many food sources, you know, from around the world, like bananas, fish, lobsters, bread, vegetables. So you're pulling nutrients from all over, and that's what makes like a food scrap compost like a really rich and like almost complete fertilizer, dare I say. I don't think I'm legally allowed to say that, but if you put a food scrap compost up against a grass-based compost, there's no comparison. Food scrap compost will add nourishment so much, like so much more. Like think of so let's say there's a dairy and the dairy feeds, like grows their own feed from one field. So if that field is deficient in silica, then the feed is going to be deficient in silica, and then the cow's deficient, and then the milk is deficient, and the manure is deficient, and then the compost you make from that manure is deficient. So like just like our bodies, the compost is only has what you put in it. So that's why food scraps are good.
All right.
right.
I think we were supposed to give you a 1-minute warning, and I don't know if we did that, but we're at 3:31.
Yeah. We gave you a 1-minute warning, 3 minutes too late.
That's all right.
Andrew, that was great, man. I want to thank you for all of your knowledge and experience and guidance. I think you probably helped out everyone here today with the logistics of moving around a bunch of material. And I don't know if anybody's ever been to Black Earth, but where they're operating is not an easy place to move stuff around. And Andrew certainly has a pretty efficient space in a really awkward place to move massive amounts of compost. So this is the guy that knows how to do it.
Yep. Use your eyes, use your ears, and you'll figure it out.
I did post in the chat a link to our survey. If you guys would take the time to give us some feedback, that would be wonderful. There's also a link in there for the virtual vendors, which Black Earth is one of them. So we definitely want to give them our respects. And there's a link in there for the auction, which of course would help NOFA Mass continue to bring all this wonderful content to our Massachusetts farmers. That being said, thank you, Andrew. Way to go. And I don't know. Oh, Andrew, if you want to throw your email in the chat before we shut her down,
Yeah,
people can ask you direct questions or how to get some of that wonderful Black Earth compost. I'll let that go. There we go.
Yeah, and if you want to save the chat, there should be 3 little dots down at the bottom of your chat, and it'll give you the option to save the chat if you want to.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
Jocelyn.
Thanks,
Thank
John.
you, everybody,
Thanks,
for
Andrew.
coming. Thank you, Andrew.
Cool. And I'll be at the thing at 4 o'clock if anyone wants to talk more.
That's right. We got a great Q&A from quite a few different presenters today at 4. So
Yeah. I mean, if anyone wants to talk now, I'm not going anywhere.
we can chat a little bit more. Somebody might need this room, but
Oh.
I'll keep it open here. I can pretty much keep it open until 3:40. So,
Okay.
Yeah, we can hang out here for 7 more minutes. I bet Mac has the questions.
Yeah, actually, how besides turning it or adding more carbon would you deal with too much moisture? I had this problem earlier this week and I ended up adding more carbon. So now my pile's not going to be ready in time.
Yeah, exactly. You like restarted it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really turning it in the sun. And so why did you think it has too much moisture?
Initially it got it from, we got like 12 inches of snow about a month ago. And then it's been on and off raining ever since then.
Yeah.
So it's just been pretty terrible. I probably should have covered it at that point. It was made enough that I could have left it, but
yeah. Yeah.
Mess with it.
And like, when's the last time you added a nitrogen?
I did add some recently with the extra carbon too. But before that, it was a very packed truckload of leaves that was pretty damp too. So
yeah, is it still heating up?
It's back on the heating cycle again.
Yeah, okay.
I'm waiting to see some signs.
So that's where a blanket could help, because it'll let it breathe, and like if you're gonna compost through the winter, it'll let it breathe and exhaust, but it will kind of shed the moisture.
Cool.
So I would not, so don't turn it if it's about to rain.
Yeah.
Because when you turn it and it's all fluffed, it's going to absorb a lot more. Like if it's a sad pile and it's kind of like flattened, it will actually shed quite a bit more. So yeah.
Cool.
John, how are your blankets?
I use them like particularly just for storing. That's I don't really. I'm also doing things more of Elaine Ingham. In baskets, forking it. taking all my ingredients, building a pile, letting it run. And then once it's done, I'll move that. I try to put everything close to a wood line so it actually ages and hopefully gets inoculated with a bunch of, you know, inoculants from my wood line. And then that's when I would do, you know, not a full blanket, but just on the top. Completely dependent on how much moisture we got coming in and that kind of thing. But it really is, it's just a resting blanket particularly.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I don't like, are you expecting inoculants to come up underneath or like drift in from the air? Like what's the theory there?
And so I do see that during and now I'm looking at this stuff in a microscope. So, you know, when my pile's done, I won't see a whole lot of fungal activity at that time. But after it's been sitting near my wood line for a month or two, I start seeing really long, fully developed, huge fungal strands because they are now, you know, through the thermal process, we've gotten rid of a bunch of weed seed, whatnot, broken down everything, prepped it, and now that fungal presence, which could also still be in a spore that made it through the thermal pile as well, is now sporulating and, you know, breaking things down. I'm using my compost more as an inoculant. So I'm trying to make, you know, concentrated small piles because I'm just one guy with a pitchfork, and then taking the compost and brewing teas and extracts so that I can then carry that fungal activity to somebody's garden.
Yep. I think compost is like used as an inoculant is like interesting in that like each like little piece of compost is like the space pod that's got like the nutrients and some food, which is the carbon, that can travel to the new soil. And so you got the inoculant, some food, and some nutrients. So it's got everything there to then allow the fungus to establish. You know, like if you just took a dry fungal inoculant and spread that, then it might not as easily establish.
Completely, because you're bringing the whole party. You're bringing and more importantly, and that's just, I don't think it's anything about one particular microbe that we're talking about, but that diversity. And going back to what you were talking about, you know, your food stocks going into these compost piles, that diversity is what's critical, because we don't understand what's going on in the soil, and we probably never will understand what's going on in the soil because it is so complicated. Yeah. But if you've got the diversity of what we do know are beneficial microbes, there's a pretty good chance that things are going to work out through the entire growing season. And, you know, the fungal component and the bacterial component are the guys that are breaking down the minerals, particularly those two guys in particular, because they can dissolve rocks. So they have the ability to take your mineral component and make it plant available.
Yeah. But if they don't have like food to live on, then they're not going to be able to do that. So that's why
or oxygen or water.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. They need their entire space pod.
Correct.
And that's what the moon and start breaking open rocks. You need like a spaceship.
Right. All right, guys, I do think we got to shut this down. This is awesome. I wish like we could all go have a beer and keep talking about, you know, compost. That'd be the best. But
I know.
Someday we'll be able to do it again.
All right.
Awesome, Andrew. Thank you so much, man. That was great.
Yep. I'm going to be at that panel at 4. So if you're there, I'll see you.
Yep.
Good luck, Mac.